Hello. Good evening, everyone. My name's Giacomo DiGrigoli. I'm the Executive Director of the International Orange Chorale of San Francisco. It is lovely to see you all here tonight. Thank you for being here, not only for a beautiful evening of music, but for a conversation that we think is equally important and resonant. Tonight's program invites us into the complex and often unspoken world of estrangement, what it means to be separated from someone we once loved, or to carry unresolved relationships that continue to shape us. We had originally planned to premiere a new work tonight by composer Tarek O'Regan, built around community testimonies on this very subject. That premiere has been delayed to this fall, but the process of gathering and holding these stories continues. And we felt it was important to honor that work in progress. To help us do that tonight, I would like you to help me welcome to the stage tonight the director of an organization that supports individuals navigating estrangement in all its forms called TogetherEstranged. Please welcome the director of that program, Ms. Angel Cassin. Angel has been, have a seat, yeah, feel free to have a seat. Angel, you've been an extraordinary partner in this project. I am thrilled to welcome you to the stage. I'd like to begin tonight in our chat hearing a little bit about your background on estrangement and about your own journey into this work. And for those maybe who are less familiar, maybe you can start with a definition of what is estrangement and what are some common misconceptions about it.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a real honor, and I've been able to travel from Ireland, so it feels like a really special event for lots of reasons. Estrangement, yeah, it's complicated. It means different things to different people. I think ultimately it's some kind of severing of a relationship. Maybe you wanted that relationship, maybe you didn't. From family perspective, usually you did. You've had to make some sort of decision, or a decision was made on your behalf, and where some kind of connection existed, it doesn't exist anymore. And that shape and form, it's different for everybody. Sometimes it's a very physical separation, sometimes it's emotional, often it's both. But it's an intentional decision by one party or another that the relationship can't exist in the way that it did. And I think there's a lot of misconceptions around those decisions because people assume that there's maybe little thought gone into it. Maybe it was a flash decision, one made in a rush. I don't know why that misconception exists, but I think that's probably the most common response that we get, that we hear in our community, well, what could you do to make this happen? And like, it's your mom, it's your dad, it's your whoever, and you know, their frustration, their anxiety, their worry that it could happen to them is projected onto their response, and it's understandable, but I just think that idea that it happens overnight perpetuates in society, and that's so wrong. It's often accumulation, 1,000 tiny cuts, maybe some big ones in there too, and then somebody had to make a really, really, really challenging decision, and often it's not about, you know, anything other than just self-preservation.
I think in our conversations, one of the things that you've taught me through the process of working on this piece and in the process of gathering stories from the community through surveys is that it's not a binary. I think people think it's like, well, you're either in contact with folks or you're not. And in fact, one of the things I think you taught me was this lovely gradation scale of understanding what estrangement might look like. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I think that's what I was referring to when I said it means...
Oh yeah, you got it. Thank you.
Sorry, yeah.
They're recording. They're not for projecting. So we're gonna have to do that with our voices as best we can. Do you want to move down there? Should we move down?
Yeah,
oh,
sure.
Actually, well, hey Zach, can we move down a little closer to folks? Okay. We'll move a little closer and we'll speak a little louder. How does that sound? I know.
They're just for recording. They're not for amplification.
It's better than
Oh, that's good. It's not all right. Okay.
Can you hear me okay now? It's better.
Just speak louder.
Okay. Yeah, so I think that's what I was referring to before when I was saying that, family estrangement means different things to different people, and depending on the type of estrangement that you're living in. And basically, it's a spectrum. I think possibly if you want to go on the extremes first, you could be talking something like absolute no contact ever. And maybe on the other side of that, you could be looking at fairly cordial contact where you still maintain a sort of relationship, but it's limited. And there's an emotional distance there that didn't exist before, and it's intentional. And I think people often move along that spectrum, like back and forth, and like life, it brings up different things, and therefore people move along that, dependent on the situation, the people, your experiences. That doesn't mean that you're not living in estrangement of some kind, because of course it's again coming back to that intentionality, like you've made a decision to shift the way the relationship looks for all kinds of different reasons. And I think it brings people into our community more often because they realize they don't have to belong to this rigid definition in order to access support and other people who are living this experience. And I think that's really important, to broaden out that definition so that people aren't alone in what is already an incredibly isolating experience.
You have had the rare opportunity to hear so many stories through Together Estranged and to help hold space for those experiences. What are some of the themes or emotional threads that you have seen come up again and again in the stories that people share?
Probably the first thing that we hear for somebody who's just joined the community is, am I a bad person? And I don't think that theme goes away, because you've made a decision that goes against everything that society and others tell you should be the case, that you haven't made it work. And I think there's lots of other tendrils to that bad child syndrome that I call, guilt and shame and loneliness. But also to acknowledge that a lot of people make this decision and then they feel a euphoria, a freedom that they couldn't have had in the context of the relationship. And so that things are possible. The decision they made or that was made on their behalf has then often opened up another world of possibility, despite the inevitable grief of having lost what is a foundational relationship in your life. Irrespective of how you feel about having made the decision, you're still going to experience loss. And so we find a lot of people come and they're grieving. And that's complicated for anybody here. I'm sure most people have either gone through a loss or known someone who has, and that's messy and it's not linear.
What do you wish more people, especially those who haven't experienced it, understood about the everyday realities of estrangement?
So I travelled here from Ireland, and I'm staying with friends that I've made through this community, and I think having the conversations with those people like yourself and like my friend who's here tonight, we get to talk about those practical things that maybe people don't understand that affect you. And I like to call it the admin of estrangement. And what I mean by that...
The administration
the
of
administration of, you don't have your paperwork. You don't have your medical history notes. You don't have the things, the documents, the practical things that tie you to who you are and where you've come from. And you spend a lot of your time navigating systems, processes, procedures to try and, retrieve that information, or if not retrieve it, find ways to work around it in order that you can actually continue to live your life. When I got married, for example, I didn't have my birth certificate, so there was a process of trying to retrieve that. I know for others who are trying to continue their education, build their life up afterwards, accessing financial aid, it's almost impossible. Getting support for living, in terms of renting, getting a guarantor, like all the social structures that are dependent on family ties as your safety net don't exist anymore. And you either have to build them yourself or find ways around them, and you're often facing people who are in charge of making those decisions that don't understand, and there's a lot of bridges to be built into that mutual understanding.
Are there any particular moments or testimonies that have stayed with you? Moments that have helped you see the nuance or resilience in people navigating estrangement?
Yes, there have been many. I think actually the word nuance is really, really important in this conversation. So much of the world is polarized at the moment. I don't think that's helpful. And this is no different. You know, there is nuance in this. You can really miss someone who you don't want to have a relationship with anymore. You can feel love towards someone that you can't have in your life anymore. And I think those nuanced conversations happen so much more often within our community support groups because people aren't afraid of somebody jumping in and saying, well, maybe there's opportunity there to reconcile, and maybe if that exists, you can find connection. And so I think that's really challenging for people to overcome the lack of understanding around the nuance. Yes, I really love them. Yes, I really miss them, but I can't have them in my life. And so I think what you find is the testimonies people share and the connections people build that stay with you are when they're able to build these connections with other people within our community and build healthy relationships and understanding that last them, that, you know, feed them, that allow them to flourish and bloom and blossom. And that's what we see more often than not, is people being able to build those relationships and feel that they're doing something good and meaningful and building a life, you know, where it wasn't possible before in any form.
This concert and the piece that we're developing with Tariq O'Regan, it's really rooted in the emotional landscape that you're describing, of this nuance, of the sort of duality of things. This emotional landscape of gathering voices, we're turning these lived experiences now into art. And I'd like to talk a little bit about this collaboration that we have worked on together, which has been fabulous, and in general, the artistic process around estrangement. You have been an incredible collaborator in helping us gather stories and testimonies for this project, particularly through our online surveys. What has that process been like for you and for Together Estranged, to get some random call from some choir in San Francisco who says, we need your help putting together this interesting piece of music?
Yeah, so I remember the day I received the email. I'm not going to say, did I think it was a scam? No. No, honestly, it felt very validating that this experience was going to be explored and then expressed. I think it's so stigmatized, you know, it's really isolating. And so the idea of creating art from this experience with our community, having their voices reflected in something beautiful, it's moving, it's connecting, it's a connector. And I think that's ultimately what something like this can provide. It's a point of connection, a conversation that you wouldn't have been able to have with somebody who doesn't know anything about you. Suddenly you could share a piece of music and say, this is me, this is my experience, this is what I've been living. And you may not hear back from them, you may have an entry point into a conversation that you couldn't have had, and that is what art can do. It can connect worlds in a way that describing it or sitting down and having a lengthy conversation might not. So it was an incredibly exciting opportunity, one I've really enjoyed connecting with you over and seeing it come to life and hearing the progress around it, and knowing that within our community already people are expressing themselves through poetry. We have an amazing poetry collective. We have an amazing art submission where people submit pieces of art they've made around this. Like this, it's an essential part of this experience to be able to express it. So yeah, an honor, exciting, moving, but ultimately just really meaningful.
Is there a piece of art or a song or a poem that you particularly relate to, that you would share, that might sort of share your story in some way?
There's a beautiful artist called Dolores Keane. She's a traditional Irish musician, and she has a song called You'll Never Be the Sun. And for me, it's meaningful on many personal levels, but I think it can encapsulate the challenge of bringing new life into the world. What will they mean to you? What will your relationship be like with the person that you create? How do you form that bond? How do you interpret that bond and live in the world and be amazed by them and impressed by them, but also respect them? And I think that's the ultimate tug and pull and push of life, of human connection, and figuring out how to be on the planet together.
I know for many in our audience tonight, this concert is likely to stir maybe something personal for many of us. I'd like to close with a few thoughts about where this conversation maybe goes from here. Maybe some moments of reflection, some moments of hope, but it's a pretty heavy topic. What would you invite audience members to hold in their hearts as they listen tonight, especially if they've experienced estrangement themselves or if they love someone who has?
I mean, the chances are we're all impacted here. I mean, the data is patchy, there's not enough research in this space, but from what does exist, about 25% of people in America are impacted by family estrangement. So chances are there are people here, maybe they've never used that word, maybe it's a different word, but it is ultimately to say that you aren't alone. You aren't alone. You're not bad, you know, and that you can find community, and you're allowed to find community, and you're allowed to be supported, and you don't have to do it alone. And there's lots of people who have all kinds of experiences of this, and it might not look like yours, but you might learn something from it. I think estrangement ultimately is a loss. It's a grief, and that's messy. So when you hear people talking about it, singing about it, it might stir up, you know, all kinds of emotion, and that's okay. And I think music can be a real access point to emotion, and maybe this is just your permission slip to feel a little bit.
Can I ask a little bit more about the permission slip? Because you actually mentioned this, and it was something that I loved, something that I plan to take away for myself, this notion of giving yourself permission. And you have this lovely tool that you've made for yourself and that you've shared with others and you shared with me. Can you talk a little bit about this notion of a permission slip and the power of that?
Yeah, so I think sometimes in life we tell ourselves we're not allowed to do something. Maybe somebody told us at some point we weren't allowed to do something. Maybe that's what we've always kind of told ourselves. But maybe that doesn't make any sense. You know, maybe we are allowed, and sometimes we forget. We forget that we can feel our feelings, that we can try something new, that we're allowed to make mistakes, that we are allowed to pursue a passion. We don't have to be the best at it. And an exercise that I learned about in the last sort of couple of years with it, you know, you can create a physical permission slip for yourself. And you can make it as elaborate as you want. You can put a rubber stamp on it. You can do all kinds of fancy calligraphy, whatever it is. And you keep that. And whenever you are unsure about if you're allowed to do something, you can bring it out. And you can be reminded that you are allowed, and that you have permission, and that you have given yourself that permission.
I love that myself. I actually started working on my own personal permission slip, so I highly recommend it. It's been pretty powerful. An important question: what gives you hope in this work? And where do you see the conversation going next within Together Estranged and in society more broadly?
Probably two parts to that. What gives me hope right now is sitting here about to listen to some beautiful music, that I've been able to connect with people and feel less alone in what is otherwise an incredibly isolating experience, and that has been a common theme, obviously, in Together Estranged, is building community. What gives me hope more generally? I've had some really interesting conversations with some very interesting and skilled and knowledgeable people over the last couple of years in my role. And one of those conversations I had earlier this year with an incredible psychologist called Sharon Martin, and she talked about having a much more functional view of family so that we can have a much more functional view of family estrangement. And that's not to say that we need to, quote unquote, normalize it. It's a loss, it's a grief. It's not something anybody wants to have to do. But we don't choose our family. And sometimes within family systems, we don't have the capacity, the resources, the skills to be able to figure everything out at the one time and be able to maintain relationships that are otherwise harmful. And I think if we can reframe our thinking about what is normal in family, then we can reframe our thinking about what is normal in the decision to make a family estrangement happen within your family, within your community, and that it's actually maybe a very healthy and functional response to a very perhaps abusive or dysfunctional setup. And I think if we can do that, we can stop the stigma which is attached to it and start healing collectively and actually building community, building the skills that we need to have more functional relationships, and that can only lead to good things.
For those who, last question for you. For those who may be quietly carrying estrangement, is there something you would want them to know tonight?
I think I mentioned it before, you're not alone. There are many other people like you, and you can access community, and you will not be judged in that community, and you will be welcomed. And, you can come find us. We're available. We're international, and hopefully within that, you can maybe find an access point, language to describe your experience, people to validate you, and maybe a wee bit of connection in all of that. And hopefully that's getting you started off on feeling a bit better about yourself, feeling a bit better about the situation, and going from there,
Yeah. I have to say, as someone who has personally gone through this journey, and having it coincide with getting to know you, getting to work on it, getting to work on this concert together, I want to say on behalf of all of IOCSF, on behalf of myself, hopefully on behalf of this audience who gets to hear this great conversation tonight and more further beyond, Angel, I can't thank you enough for being here for tonight, for your wisdom, for the work that you do, for the community that you have created. I think I speak for us all when I say I hope to see more from Together Estranged, more from you, and we hope we'll see you this November when we have the premiere of our new piece.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for spending the time. May I?
It was really, really great. Thank you.